So Alireza, going into round 8, was the co-leader with Fabiano Caruana. Now in round 7, he took down Jan Nepomniachtchi. He also took down Ding earlier in the tournament. Who is this guy, right? If only we'd seen the Alireza Magnus match. That's what we wanted to see. And so today, Alireza had his tail up. He was out for a victory. Now Duda, he plays this really boring opening variation, the Exchange Slav. Boo! Very, very boring, dry reputation. But Alireza is having none of it. He says, I'm not going to let you just shut down the game. Now look at this symmetrical pawn structure, right? This is why it's so boring, all the pieces. But watch what Alireza does. So the pawn gets attacked on b7. Now bishop b4 is standard. You interfere here. And after white goes bishop b5, there's now a threat to take this knight with check. And then the queen picks up the bishop. So black castles, the knight gets eliminated, but now you take this knight with check. Queen recaptures, and now this is a very standard drawing line. You go rook c8, pinning that bishop, the knight jumps in, defending it, and now this knight jumps to g4, challenging that one. You get takes, bishop takes, the queen sidesteps the pin, the rook captures, yes, white wins a pawn, but black gets the domination of the open file. You can't take here, whoops, or you're literally getting checkmated. So what white does is swap the queens, you get something like this, and because of the opposite cut of bishops and the domination of the only open file, this is why black just draws these games, 99 times out of 100. So that's the standard drawing line, rook c8. But what did Alireza play? Bang, knight e4, the queen sidesteps, I should probably not say bang, let me show you the real bang moment. B takes on c6, rook c1 hitting the pawn, and now we get bang, g5. What a great Alireza move. And the computer is not approving of this stuff. It likes white's position now. So the bishop drops back, and rook c8 now played to defend this pawn. And what's Alireza's idea here? Well, in typical aggressive style, he wants to just run these ones down and get an attack going. Now, if the queen picks up a second pawn, this is bad because of pawn h5. You're threatening to trap this bishop, and so you have to give it room, and then black can shatter the structure, and doing well here. You can attack that one. If the king defends, then rook a8 drives the queen away, picks up this pawn. Now you're invading, threatening the king. Good for black. So we saw knight d2. Challenges this piece, and in the event of this, you can chop the knight or whatever. So we see knight takes on g3, pawn recaptures, and now this is such an Alireza move. So you can go rook a7 here to cover the pawn, and if it gets attacked a second time, we do see this rook lift in the game, well then you could add some protection with the queen. But what does Alireza do? King g7. He abandons the a pawn, he just wants to go for this ingenious kind of unusual attack. So we see rook c5, rook h8, rook a5 hitting the pawn. And now when I look at this game, I would have expected pawn to h5, more in Alireza's style. Because yes, this drops off, but you keep the rooks on the board. But what does Alireza do? Well, rook c7. And I'm guessing the thought process was, okay, we'll trade rooks, but this was a pretty passive rook defending a pawn. That was a very active rook, so it makes sense for me. Now he goes pawn h5. And the next move gets a question mark for Duda. So he goes b3, computer doesn't love it because it wanted knight f3. This is just a really annoying knight basically. It's hopping to e5 where it will pressure here, and black can't go f6 at the moment because this is such a powerful piece. So that was technically best, but b3 played, okay. Pawn h4 now from Alireza. We see takes, pawn recaptures, and now knight f3, spinning into e5. So the bishop hops back to g6, covers this pawn, and now this sets a trap as well. Because if you go knight e5 immediately, the most natural looking move in the world, well then black suddenly got this counter shot of queen g5, hitting this pawn. And if you do something like rook h2, which is one of the best moves, then there's queen f5 coming in on the light squares, and you basically just can't avoid this perpetual now. You keep driving the king all over the board, that's a draw. So we didn't see knight e5. Instead, rook h3, great move from Duda, and Alireza is now forced to swap off the queens because this one is so powerful. He has to keep the rook with this pawn so it doesn't drop. What if he just waits with the bishop? Well, then the knight hops in, the bishop drops back, but then rook f3. You know, this is one of the other points of this rook swing. You can cover with rook f8, but then rook f4, bishop f5. Obviously, this pawn's on the whole time as well, not even dropped yet. But this is one of the top computer lines. You just squeeze, squeeze, squeeze black. It's very unpleasant. So we see queen a8 instead. Alireza chops these ones off. The rook recaptures. He hits that pawn, and this is his idea. That after a4, he lands bishop c2 and starts hoovering off those queenside pawns. So Duda takes here, the bishop captures here, we see check, king f8 from Alireza, and rook to f4. And now here Alireza, he goes wrong under the pressure here. So there's a couple of threats in the air, knight e5 and knight g5. So from e5, the knight's going to hit these two. From g5, it's going to hit these two, you know, threatening to take on e6, using the fact that the pawn is pinned. And so Alireza, he covers with rook a7. But what he should do is king e7. Because now if knight e5, for example, well, you're just in time to go pawn f6. Yes, you drop this one with check. But after king d6, the knight's on a bad circuit, has to hit b4, and then you pick up this pawn with tempo against the knight. So after it moves away, you can then go king e7, cover this pawn. Yes, white's a pawn up, but it's not a pass pawn, and once these all get liquidated, it should in theory be a draw. But what Alireza does is rook a7. So now he's thinking, okay, if you go knight e5 again, well, I'm going to take your pawn. I'll cover this one. I'm covering this square. I'm all good. And if you go knight g5, well, equally, then king g7 covers against everything. The pawn is covered. There's no takes here. And this one's then soon going to drop. But this is what Alireza will have missed from afar, pawn a5. His time is getting low. Because now if the rook takes, well, you can jump in with knight g5 and there are two threats. So if you come back with the rook, well, this one now drops. This is now an isolated pawn, not pleasant. We see something similar in the game. So Duda doesn't capture the pawn. He goes bishop a4. We see pawn a6 now played, again trying to decoy the rook, but bishop b5 prepares to capture. But now here's the really nice point to Duda's play. He goes knight g5, threatening to take here and still pressuring here so the rook can't capture. Now in the game, Alireza takes this pawn. But if he goes king e8, just sidestepping this threat of taking using the pin, this is the problem. This is why Duda's run that a pawn down the board, because you can actually liquidate the pieces and then push it through. You know, if that pawn wasn't there, then the bishop could stop it. But because it is, it's game over. So Alireza takes the pawn with the bishop, but now we see takes with check. King e7 and knight g5 hitting this pawn. And here Alireza, he capitulates. So he should go king f8 to put up the most resistance. However, still challenging, you know, king d2. The king can march all the way in on the dark squares. There are ideas of g4 and running that pawn further down. It's still very unpleasant. But what we see in the game is pawn f6. The knight attacks it, and you can't actually defend that pawn now in any good way. So it just gets chucked with f5. Rook captures, but this is game over. Because bishop d3 is landed, going for the skewer, but it's easily dealt with rook e5 check, the king sidesteps, and the knight hops back. And white's basically got two passed pawns, it's just too much. So Alireza tries rook a2. Threat to check from e2, and after king d1, you know, you wouldn't want to go king f1, step into the windmill tactic, then pick up the pawn on f2. So knight h3 covers, we see bishop c4, and now here Duda isn't super precise. The top move is rook h5, coming away from the king's attack, preparing to meet c5, but he goes g4. Really logical, but Alireza could have gone c5 here, with the idea being if you keep pushing the pawn, well then you can check king d1 and take here. And because of the pin, after the pawn recaptures, you win this one, should be a draw. But okay, we didn't see c5. You know, Alireza just not finding the best defensive tries. He checks, the king goes, now rook a2 and g5, and that pawn is just marching. We get c5, g6, bishop b3 check, king e1, rook a1 check, but the king starts slithering out, heading for the king side. Pawn c4, desperate counterplay, Rook e8 stops this rook from now coming to the back rank, prepares to push the g-pawn. Rook a7 stops it, but now check, and here Alireza resigns the game. Why? Well, if you go, say, king e6, staying with this pawn and heading for this one, well, then you can check, the king goes, and you don't even have to take this pawn. More precise is check. The king can come in front of the pawn, but then you can march this king in. Say c3, king g5, and if you keep pushing, this is even leading to a checkmate. If you don't push, if you do something like this, best move, well then you can check, the king's driven out and the pawn pushes through. There are other winning lines too, but just overwhelming. So it wasn't premature to resign here. But fair play to Alireza, fighting to the end. You've got to love him for that. So Fabi is now out in front by half a point, and tomorrow is the final round, but still 3 chasing, half a point behind, including Alireza. If you want to see another fantastic game, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.